Yo, I've been a huge fan of the Ninjutso Sora 4K, and it was my best mouse for 2023 due to its top end specs with the tried and true shape, very good 4K implementation, and versatility, allowing me to switch from fingertip to claw whenever I needed to. So when the Sora V2 came out, I was super excited to pick one up myself, thinking it would be an incremental upgrade to its predecessor. Ninjutso has instead chosen to completely flesh out the Sora series with this mouse, specializing in users who claw grip, upgrading the shape and making it absolutely amazing for both aggressive and relaxed claw and all variations of it as well. If you main claw, the Sora V2 has to be on your list of considerations when choosing a mouse. The dongle that comes with the Sora V2 only goes up to 4K and you'll have to buy a separate dongle when 8K releases. Anyways, onto the most important change of this mouse, the shape. When you hear Sora V2, you expect the V2 to be a second better version of a pre-existing mouse, right? Like the XM2 is the same shape as the XM1. If there are changes to the shape, usually the name changes similar to how Endgame Gear made the OP1. The Sora V2 is pretty much different in hand. It doesn't feel like you're holding a completely different mouse, but the changes are noticeable. The original Sora and Sora 4K was a slightly smaller clone of the XM1 shape, with the wide back hump that fills out primarily the base of your palm. It was for a long time one of the best shapes if you claw gripped. With the Sora V2 however, Ninjutso basically squished the front end of the mouse, making it shorter, but also the back hump being pushed upwards a little bit, making it a little taller than the Sora 4K. This changes how much contact your palm is making, with the hump actually sitting a little deeper into your palm. The extra height somehow molds into my palm a lot better and feels a lot more locked in compared to the 4K. The V2 is also less chunky with the width of the back hump being narrower and the curves less drastic when connecting the back to the middle section of the mouse. This is akin to the OP1 being slimmer than the XM1, and this opens up viability for people with smaller hands. If your hands are small, then the problem arises when the really wide hump sort of pushes out the back of your hand, and that definitely affects how comfortable you feel with the mouse regardless of the fact that it's a good shape. The Sora V2 fixes this by decreasing the width, however because of the taller hump, people with larger hands will not feel as if the back is slipping out of your palm. I personally have a pincer claw which uses these two areas as the contact point for my palm, and with the increased height I've noticed that I'm getting more surface area contact along the knuckle joints of my middle and ring finger here. It doesn't really affect performance in any way, but it just takes some time to get used to. The second change they made to the mouse were the sides. Both the Sora V2 and the 4K had tapered sides, however the 4K was less prominent where you can almost call the sides on the 4K flat to some degree. This made fingertip very usable, and the versatility was one of the reasons why this was my favorite mouse. The V2 on the other hand follows a traditional claw grip mouse shape with its more filling back hump and significantly tapered sides. These work the best for people who place their fingers flush against the mouse, as the curve allows your fingers to naturally wrap around the mouse. On the other hand, if the contact points for your fingers are at the tips, then the tapered sides are definitely not as comfortable than if they were flat, and I will look into other mices like the Pulsar X2 V2s or the OP1 8K. The last noticeable change Ninjutso made were the buttons, specifically the comfort grooves that they added. The Sora 4K, like the XM1, had flat buttons while the V2 had subtle grooves, and it's strange and unnecessary in my opinion. The grooves don't add enough extra comfort for people clicking the mouse to justify this change. It will instead make it a little bit uncomfortable for people who click anywhere outside the middle. In my experience of seeing different grips, claw grippers are generally the people who have the biggest variety for button finger placements, but luckily they're very subtle, so for the majority of the people they won't prove much of an issue. Onto the clicks. The Sora V2 uses Omron opticals like the 4K, but they perform very differently. The opticals on the V2 do feel kind of cheap because they have a hollow sound compared to the quieter solid sounding clicks on the Sora 4K. The V2 however are much more tactile and feel way better to spam, even though they are a tiny bit heavier. They're still very light though. I would 100% prefer these over the opticals on the 4K. The buttons themselves have very little pre and post travel. Side buttons on the V2 are shorter than the 4K, but they're also larger in size, which makes it a lot easier to hit them. I heard that some people had a lot of post travel on their side buttons, but on my copy I've had kind of the opposite where there's a little bit of pre travel but no post travel at all, which is fortunate for me. Though I don't use the side buttons a lot anyways aside from voice chat. Scroll wheel on the V2 has also improved a bit, with the steps while scrolling being more defined, whereas the 4K felt smoother but somewhat slippery. However, when it comes to the middle mouse click, clicking down onto the scroll wheel of the V2 felt a lot stiffer, so if that click is important to you somehow, then there's that, but let's be honest, who the hell is spamming middle mouse anyways? Next up, the build quality and coating. The Sora V2 uses a polycarbonate plastic shell which is lighter than regular plastic, and it shows with almost a 10 gram weight reduction from 47 on the 4K down to 39 on the V2. It might not seem like a lot, but it's surprisingly light when you get it in hand and compare it. The shell also holds up quite well with solid build and no creaking under day-to-day usage, though when I intentionally put pressure onto the mouse, particularly onto the sides and the bottom, it does flex slightly, whereas the Sora 4K doesn't. This doesn't mean anything because you're never in any real use going to put that much force onto it, and even if you do, you'd have to maintain it for an extended period of time before you will likely dish out any sort of permanent damage to the shell. This is built really well. With a different kind of plastic being used, however, there is a minor problem that popped up while I was using it. The Sora V2 feels a lot hotter after 30 minutes of in-game use compared to the 4K. Even though the material feels nicer, I do prefer the cooler touch on the Sora 4K more. I mean, I don't mind it, but during summer, having a mouse that disperses heat faster would be better. The coating on both these mice are also different. The 4K has a rubberized coating that clings onto the skin a lot. This results in a high level of grippiness but cosmetically collects a lot of fingerprints, sweat and grime very easily. The V2 on the other hand has a slight matte finish similar to the Atlantis Mini 4K, the one that only comes in black. It's still very grippy, and because of its more matte finish, all the dirt doesn't show as readily, which is nice. The mouse comes without skates applied, you have to do it yourself, but the two they provided, one being the 4-cornered shown here and the other one being a larger surface area, were just your average skates. The glide is surprisingly horrendous on cloth surfaces, especially slower control pads, with a lot of tug when starting a movement. It's decent on faster pads and pads with the tighter weave, but these skates are being hard carried by the low weight of the mouse. If this mouse was heavier, I would have swapped them out instantly. Last thing to cover are the 4K implementation and battery life. Right now, you can't use anything above 1K at all, but judging from how they were implemented on the predecessor, 4K should be completely fine. On 1K, the performance was solid as expected, and I've said it before, but 1K and 4K is barely noticeable in real games, so if you're thinking of getting this but you're hesitant since you're stuck on 1K at the moment, just get it because it's low-key delusional to think that 4K will make a huge difference, if any difference at all. Even in just pure aim, there's a lot more things to focus on than the extra clarity and smoothness higher polling rate is going to give you, so when you also have to think about the macro stuff like in-game decisions and awareness, having 4K is the least of your worries. Battery life on the other hand is okay. I remember seeing someone say that the battery life was bad, but I haven't had to charge it yet after a week of using it, at least 7 hours each day, so I would say that it's solid, definitely not the best but not bad at all. Overall, the Sora V2 is very goated in its own way. The 4K is a claw dominant mouse, but it's versatile enough so you can still use it without clawing. In a sense, the 4K plays it safe by not making the shape super defined and restrictive towards a certain grip style. The V2 on the other hand ditches this principle and has it lean in further towards one end of the spectrum. It may send away some people who enjoy using it with other grips like fingertip, but it makes the intended targets, the claw users, have a much better experience with the mouse rather than having a safe shape that fits everything really well but specializes in nothing. If you're looking for a mouse to claw, you should consider picking one of these up because it's going to be a contender for the best claw grip mice in 2024.